Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're looking at Paul on the island of Malta. This is after the shipwreck. If you were with us yesterday and studied along with us yesterday, you saw that the ship they had basically wrecked ashore, drove the boat ashore. It started to break apart, and so they all made it to the shore safely. All I think it was 271 of them. 276, I'm sorry, of them. And so today we're going to look at Paul on the island of Malta. It's a short little section that we'll see here, and then tomorrow we'll see where Paul finally, after all this, arrives at Rome. And so today's reading is Acts 28, verses 1 through 10. It says, "Once we were safe on shore, we learned that we were on the island of Malta. The people of the island were very kind to us. It was cold and rainy, so they built a fire on the shore to welcome us. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, bit him on the hand. The people of the island saw it hanging from his hand and said to each other, 'A murderer, no doubt. Though he escaped the sea, justice will not permit him to live.' But Paul shook off the snake into the fire, and he was unharmed. The people waited for him to swell up or suddenly drop dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw that he wasn't harmed, they changed their minds and decided he was a god. Near the shore where we landed was an estate belonging to the Publius, I think is how you say that, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us and treated us kindly for 3 days. As it happened, Publius' father was ill with fever and dysentery. Paul went in and prayed for him, and laying hands on him, he healed him. Then all the other sick people on the island came in and were healed. As a result, we were showered with honors, and when the time came to sail, people supplied us with everything we would need for the trip." And so again, just kind of finishing this up, like Malta was a major island under Roman control. It was about 60 miles south of Sicily, if you look at a map. The locals of Malta understood justice, right? We see this, right? Paul was bitten, and so they're thinking, well, I'm sure they knew somehow that these were prisoners, and so we see that they just like, oh, he must have been a murderer because he escaped the wreck and the sea, but justice is going to get him one way or the other. And so they were waiting out for this justice to be carried out on him. But when nothing happened, right, bad happened to Paul, the natives understood him as having power over snakes and concluded he himself was a god, right? They're like, oh, he must be a god. But again, because you don't see stuff like this every day, right? I mean, it bit him, and a lot of people, oh, it must have been a dry bite or something like that. The way Luke describes this, and I think this is part of the reason why he describes this, since he's a doctor, is not only did it bite him, but it hung from him. So it wasn't like a bite and then a release. It actually hung there, and so it stayed there, and so its fangs were in him for a while. So more than likely, we're not looking at a dry bite here. This is God's providence, right? And some, now I will say, some people will take this verse and along with some other verses and be like, oh, well, this is where some of the old school snake handling would come from. Basically, if you're a true follower of God and you got bit by a snake, then it wouldn't harm you. Don't push that, please. This was to show these people who Christ was, who Paul worshipped and followed, and we see that as Paul went in and goes and heals the people and heals the father and all these things. And so we see him going in and healing all the sick. And again, we see this, and typically we see this miraculous manifestation of the Holy Spirit that we see here typically went to help spread the gospel. And that was the idea here too. Now, again, it doesn't go into great detail of but I'm sure Paul would have spoke Jesus or taught Jesus to people and did this while he was there. And so we see that Paul's survival and then the healing of all these people demonstrates God's protection and all that. And so they were so grateful. They showed their gratefulness that they supplied the ship's company, right, with what they needed. It's like, oh, here you go, And so it worked out for them as well because they were able to supply them with everything they needed. And so, like I said, this was a shorter one. This was a shorter read, but it's interesting, right? It was interesting to see the journey that Paul had to take. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday. Paul has been wanting to go to Rome for a long time. And it's like God's going to let him get there, but it's like it's not going to be easy. And I think sometimes, God does this in our, there's things that we want to do, you know, and sometimes I feel like I need to learn this a little bit more too. There's things we want to do, or there's destinations we want to get to that we want God to bless us with, but we have to understand it's not going to be an easy trip. Right? There's going to be storms. There's going to be shipwrecks. There's going to be, you know, things that get in the way, hardships that keep you from getting there sometimes. Right? And a lot of that's the devil, I think, sometimes too. But I think other times the reason for this is because we appreciate it more when we finally do get there. If everything's easy, everything's handed to us, everything's just given to us, that makes it so much. It's not, you don't appreciate it when it happens. So I think that's part of the reason why we see this as well. So tomorrow we will see. We're going to look at Paul arriving in Rome, and you know, we'll see that, and then next week will be like one or two sections, 1 or 2 days in Acts, and then we'll roll over into what's referred to as the prison epistles sometimes, but it's the letters that Paul wrote while he was still in prison, right? It's, you know, basically under guard in Rome, that we'll see there. So as always, I hope everyone's enjoying these. I hope you're learning from them. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, ask that you do that, so that way, you know, we can follow along with us as we continue through this study. And as always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch, and I hope you'll have a wonderful day.